What the fuck is up? It is day 84 of reading every single day for the rest of my life for 30 minutes. Today I have Carrying the Fire by Michael Collins. I got 30 minutes. Starting now, we are at the middle of page 27. Let's go. Let me check my hair real quick before the shit starts. Alright. Let's get it. Armed with the kind of self-confidence this information engenders, I was ready for the next hurdle, which was a real one, passing a five-day physical exam conducted by the Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine at Brooks Air Force Base, Texas. I had been there the year before, when our test pilot school graduating class had, with a bit of prodding, volunteered to help the medics gather some baseline data on healthy patients by undergoing a wide variety of tests. So, in early July 1962, on my second trip to Brooks, I knew what to expect. Monday morning you arrived, fasting, to be greeted by a pleasant lab technician, part Dracula and part leech, who takes what seems to be a quart of blood. You then breakfast on a large beakful of glucose, sickeningly sweet, and are punctured with more needles at regular intervals during the mandering of the morning, which is interspersed with various other tests. By noon, the medics have measured, by the level of sugar in your blood, any tendency towards diabetes, and you have taken their measure as well. From now on, it is an adversary proceeding. Inconvenience is piled on top of uncertainty, on top of indigeneity, as you are poked, prodded, pummeled, and pierced. No orifice is inviolate, no privacy respected. You are a second-hand car being inspected prior to a coast-to-coast trip. Cold water is poured into one of your ears, causing your eyeballs to gyrate widely as conflicting messages are relayed to your brain from one warm and one cold semicircular canal. Your body is taped with electrocardiogram sensors, and you are ordered onto a treadmill, which maintains its inexorable pace up an imaginary mountain road. As the tilt becomes steeper, the heart rate increases until it finally reaches 180 beats per minute. Then you are allowed to rest, and your heart's recovery time is measured. You are made comfortable, strapped onto a flat table which is suddenly jerked upright, measuring your cardiovascular system's response to a sudden shift in the gravity vector. You blow into a bag, as rapidly deeply as possible, and your pulmonary efficiency is measured. The pressure inside your eyeball is ascertained by an indigenous metal cup placed against it. Since increased pressure can be the harbinger of glaucoma, your fanny is violated by the steel eel, a painful and undignified process by which 1 foot of lower bowel can be examined for cancer or other disease processes. Your eyes and ears are tested with an unbelievable attention to detail by some of the foremost specialists in the world. Then the shrinks take over where there are more stable compatriots leave off, thrust and parry. What are ink bolts supposed to be anyway? Is one crotch in 10 pictures too many? How can I describe the blank, pure white piece of paper this year? Last year I said it was 19 polar bears fornicating in a snowbank, and the interviewer's face tightened in obvious displeasure over my lack of reverence for his precious cards. Hostile, they said I was, but not this year. This year I want to fly to the moon. Badly I want it, and I will describe that white card in any way that will please them. Perhaps I see a great white moon on it, or a picture of mother and dad, with dad a little larger than mother. Second-guessing the shrinks is not easy. By week's end I am wary, but fairly confident that no obviously disqualifying defect has emerged. I do have a list of minor ailments and abnormalities. Years later I learned that it is normal to be abnormal in a half dozen or so measurements. But at the time I was not privy to anyone's problems except my own. I just assumed everyone else was Jack Armstrong. I knew that each litter must have a runt, and perhaps in this one it was me. I didn't care as long as I passed. Brooks was the first opportunity I had to see the non-Air Force competition, the civilian, Navy, and Marine pilots who wanted to fly to NASA's moon as much as I. They were impressive lot. gregarious and outgoing, smiling even with needles in their arms and thermometers in their mouths, obviously able to cope with all this and anything else an unkind fate might throw their way. I felt my competitive hackles rising. Smiling I was not, but I felt that I could handle a flying machine as well as anyone, and I just hoped I would be judged on that basis and not by a wild list of ancillary attributes dreamed up by a charm school chaperones or psychiatric soothsayers. Back at Edwards in one piece, I barely had time to brief Pat on the back. Rec she had married before. I had to scuffy off to Houston for more tests and interviews. By now our group had been sifted, winnowed, and pruned to the point out of nearly 300 candidates who had originally seemed to meet all of our NASA's criteria. Only 32, 30 Navy, 6 civilians, 4 Marines, and only 9 Air Force, but they were all charming, were left. The interviewing was, therefore, getting to the serious stage, as 1 out of 3 or 4 would be selected. It wasn't very confident as I left Edwards, mainly because, with barely 1 year's experience in flight testing, I knew my credentials were marginal. Houston, even today the name was a magical, lyrical ring. I can't imagine calling from the moon with, say, Minneapolis, we have a problem up here, or Salt Lake City, this is Astonisher 19, do you read? No, Houston, it had to be, and any blemishes the place we had certainly invisible, as far as I was concerned. I checked into the Rice Hotel as if entering the pearly gates. NASA had instructed me to use a fictitious name, which aided as tantalizing overlay of mystery to my already exciting mission. The next morning was a return to reality as other series of tests began. NASA seemed interested in measuring our powers of observation, and took an approach I had never seen before or since. We were shown 2 movies. One a grand tour of our solar system in which we flew by each planet in turn, and the second a series of underwater shots of reef life, teeming with flora and fauna. Then we took out paper and pencil and described as best we could each planet visited and each fish glimpsed. We also took another battery of psychological tests. Are you a snob or a slob? And were interviewed by a panel of NASA physicians who had before them the results of our Brooks physical exams. They were a chatty lot, and I learned a bit more about my ailments, all minor, and a few tidbits about some of my compatriots. Apparently, the Brooks shrinks had forgiven me the polar bears and even liked my test results. Then came the main course, the technical interview, a meat and potato session conducted by people who wanted to know what we had done and what we knew, and who didn't really care whether we held our hands on our hips while answering. Dex Slayton was there, and Al Shepard, and Ward North, who was in charge of astronaut training and who was also an ex-test pilot. John Glenn drifted in and out of the room, asking an easy question or two and smiling at the answers. The other 3 were tough, friendly, but no nonsense, and their technical questions required answers of substance and precision. In some cases I felt I gave satisfactory answers, in others I clearly had not. I had not, for example, known what reliability data had been accumulated on the Atlas booster to date, and my guess was far off the mark and the optimistic side. Today, most people take it for granted that these rockets will not fail, but in 1962, fewer than 9 out of 10 Atlas launches were successful. When my half hour was over, I left the impassive trio poring over their papers, preparing for the next victim. That night, we, perspiring hopeful, had cocktails and dinner with our inquisitors, as well as some of the other key people from NASA's fledgling manned spacecraft center. Scott Carpenter and Gus Grissom were there, so all of the original 7. I had now met all but Gordo Cooper and Wally Scheria. They were an impressive bunch, photogenic, personable, and with quite assurance their common denominator. They somehow stood out in a crowd. If they had been chosen by a public relations man, he could not have made a better choice. Yet I guess that PR had little to do with it. The emphasis in their selection was reported to have been on breadth of test pilot experience and on physical conditioning. As NASA gained experience, these 2 factors decreased somewhat in importance and were replaced by an emphasis on youth, education, and scientific specialties. But in early days, the environment of space was expected to produce a variety of surprises. And who better to cope with them than a tough old bird who had been around the block once or twice? I think it was good reasoning. The director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, Bob Gilruth, was also at the dinner. A delightful bald-headed teddy bear of a man. Reedy voiced, twinkly eyed, certainly not impressive, but capable of putting together an impressive team. The more people I met, the better I liked the whole operation. After dinner, someone suggested that we pair to a local strip joint, which was featuring amateur night. Hold on 1 second. I gotta check something. The director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, Bob Gilruth, was also at the dinner. Amateur night. Haha, this was the final test of the day. I weighed the upside potential versus the downside risk, in good stockbroker fashion, and decided not to go admittedly, a decision tinged with a bit of a paranoia. Thus I returned to Edwards forever in the dark as to how the amateur lovelies had made out. And with not much more information about the other group of 32 amateurs back at Edwards, the really tough part, the waiting, began. Of the 9 Air Force finalists, 6 were stationed at Edwards, and we warily kept tabs on each other, on the lookout for any abnormal behavior that might indicate someone had heard good news from NASA. On August 19th, 1962, I wrote my father. I suspect that there will be close to 10 people selected, and I suspect that the breakdown will not unduly favor either the Air Force or the Navy. They say, of course, that everyone will be selected on merit regardless of his branch of the service. I strongly suspect that at least one civilian will be included, for propaganda purposes, if nothing else, and Neil Armstrong will be on the list, unless his physical discloses some major problem. I say this because he has by far the best background of the 6 civilians under consideration, and he is already employed by NASA. Today, the military chauvinism expressed in that letter surprises me. Otherwise, it was about on target in mid-September when the word arrived. Neil's name was on the list, with one other civilian, Elliot C., 4 Air Force, 3 Navy, and no Marine. 3 of the Air Force selectees were from Edwards: Frank Borman, Jim McDivitt, and Tom Stafford. The 4th, Ed White, a classmate of mine from West Point days, was involved with all weather and testing at White-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. The 3 Navy troops were Pete Conrad, Jim Lovell, and John Young. In my opinion, this group of 9 was the best NASA ever picked. Better than the 7 that preceded it, or the 14, 5, 19, 11, and 7 that followed. Damn. My own failure was, of course, quite a blow. Even though I had never really expected to make it, I wrote my father that I had guessed 4 out of 9 correctly. Armstrong, Borman, Lovell, McDivitt, but I found it impossible to conduct a really satisfying post-mortem. The logic which would explain Ed White, athletic, gregarious, more in the mold of the original 7, did not explain Stafford, the school teacher, and so on, nor did Gilruth's letter to me provide much usable information. The impression that you made on our selection committee was favorable. Overall, however, we did not feel that your qualifications met the special requirements of the astronaut program as well as those of some other outstanding candidates. The special requirements? The special requirements, huh? Well, the special requirements, huh? Well, if I didn't have them, could I get them? Or was the door irrevocably closed behind me? Being a perpetual optimist, I focused on 2 points. First, there were strong rumors it wouldn't be more than a year or so before the burgeoning space program required selection of a 3rd NASA astronaut group. And second, Conrad and Lovell were rejects from the original 7 screening process. Therefore, since I felt my basic problem was a lack of experience, hopefully I could grow into a successful candidacy next time around. In the meantime, my job as fighter test, which had seemed the best in the world, no longer quite had a larger than life quality. I knew people in Houston and I envied them. With NASA growing by leaps and bounds, the Air Force became increasingly edgy about the role it might be assigned in the exploration and exploitation of this new medium grandly called space. Space appeared to be the great wave of the future, and certainly military uses would be found for it. The Russians, with their lead, had probably already learned to put bombs up there, and we couldn't get them down. We must learn to neutralize them or at least inspect them, and besides, we should have our men, if not bombs, up there too, which where they could perform the classic first step of any military action reconnaissance. No doubt about it, space was the new high ground, and the Air Force had best prepare to occupy it. Many things were needed to do this: money, political support, technology, people, and many different kinds of people, including qualified crew members. NASA seemed to be having success training test pilots to be astronauts. Was there a difference? And the Air Force decided to do the same. The USAF Experimental Flight Test Pilot School was promptly renamed the USAF Aerospace Research Pilot School, and the course was extended and the curriculum broadened to include the fundamentals of spaceflight. In this, the Air Force hoped to build a cadre of officers trained to fly any new vehicles which, in those confusing days, might come along. To ease the transition from test pilot schools to ARPS rhymes with CARPS, as the new school was called, a couple of postgraduate classes were conducted. In these, selected graduates of the test pilot courses were brought back for 6 months of additional instruction, while the staff struggled with the formidable task of overhauling the curriculum to provide the basic skills needed in this new space age. When I was offered a chance at the third postgrad class, I eagerly filled out the application. NASA and its astronaut program were in my blood now. Despite my recent failure, and anything which would qualify me for the next NASA selection was worth a try. So I took a 6-month leave from fighter ops, and in October 1962 reported to ARPS down on the other end, the wrong end of the flight line. Only 2 years ago I recalled I had gone through all this: books, classes, flight test data, weekends, dog work, and while it had been fun and had tapped the competitive juices the first time through, frankly I was not looking forward to it again. I was just trying to get some of that experience NASA had thought I was lacking. Or maybe they were just being polite, and I would never ever qualify to be an astronaut. But it was worth a bloody go in any way, and here I was. Here also were a strange assortment of classmates, a mixture of old and new, mostly the old. I'm tired. Or maybe they were just being polite, and I would never ever qualify to be an astronaut. But it was worth a bloody go anyway, and here I was. Here also was a strange assortment of classes. A strange assortment of classes. Classmates, a mixture of the old and the new, mostly the old. Some, like Charlie Bassett, were graduates of the most recent test pilot class and had been held over, but most were more like Ed Givens, who had graduated from the basic course 4 years before, and who had held a wide variety of assignments since then. Each of the two, incidentally, had received the Outstanding Student Award in this class, so this was not a group to be taken lightly. It also included Jim Roman, whose undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering, following which he had gone to medical school and then into the Air Force pilot training. An engineer physician pilot. Here was Greg Newbeck again, still full of the same steely determination he had shown in our test pilot class. Joe Eagle, who went on to fly the X-15 before being picked by NASA a couple of years later. Doug Benefield, one of the new multi-engine types, with vast experience in the test flying world and with the delicate tough of a fighter pilot, and so it went. A small class of 10 with a wide variety of flying experience. In fact, we students had about as much experience of one type or another as did the staff. who were struggling to design new space courses to teach us, to keep a chapter or two ahead in a textbook which had not been yet written. Consequently, we had easy time of it. We were treated as equals, and in the cutthroat competition of the test pilot course was replaced, temporarily at least, with no grades, informality, gentlemanly informality. We also had some interesting flying to do, centering on the F-104 built by Lockheed in the mid-50s. The Starfighter was the first Mach 2 fighter in our inventory. It had a long fuselage with a sharply pointed nose, a single huge engine, and tiny short wings. The wings measured only 7.5 feet from root to tip, and were so razor sharp on the leading edge that special protectors were installed whenever the plane was on the ground. The plane was designed, optimized for all-out speed, and it did go like hell, preferably in a straight line. When slowed down, it was simply too heavy for the amount of wing area, too high a wing loading, and if the engine quit, you'd better be over the Edwards Dry Lake because it dropped like a stone. Mach number, named after the German Ernst Mach, is the speed of a plane relative to the speed of sound in the air it is passing through. Mach 2 equals twice the local speed of sound. It is used instead of miles per hour because it is a better indicator to the pilot of aerodynamic peculiarities. The F-104 was our toy at ARPS, and we flew it well. We flew it high and fast, and low and slow, and we pretended it was a spacecraft and tried to do spacecraft-like things with it. We dressed up in pressure suits, climbed to 35,000 feet, got it going as fast as it was legal, Mach 2, and then pulled back to the stick and zoomed upward as high as it would go, trading kinetic energy for potential. Up we would go, ever more slowly until we floated over the top of a lazy arc in a not-so-bad simulation of the weightlessness of space. Using this technique, we would stagger up to around 90,000 feet. I think Jim Roman held the record in our class, to the chagrin of the old test pilots. At 90,000 feet, the sky overhead is so dark blue as to be almost the pure black of space. The weather, clouds, indeed practically all the atmosphere is below you. The horizon becomes a more sharply defined line, and you can detect the curvature of the earth. So near yet so far away. Grab a quick glimpse, then back to mundane chores in the cockpit. For the zoom up into this very thin air has not been without casualties. First, the afterburner portion of the engine blew out routinely at around 60,000 feet. Next, the main engine temperature would begin to climb dangerously, so that if the engine did not flame out of its own accord, it had to be shut down, usually in the vicinity of 75,000 feet. Third, as soon as the engine quit, cabin pressurization was lost, and the only thing between the pilot and a blood-bubbling death was the pressure suit. Inside, which is somewhat reduced pressure was maintained. Since pressure suit gloves had been known to pop off, we were especially careful to check the wrist locks prior to the zoom flights, and then we would tape the locks down in place with adhesive. Space-age balling wire. A mixture of sophisticated ingenuity or crudity and stupidity. I would have plenty of time to think that one over, and other crew equipment design problems like it. In the years to come, in the meantime, one more glance at the glorious views, then back to the real-world illustration of what goes up must come down. And hopefully over Edwards, with the engine working and in time for lunch, because my appetite had been truly whetted. We spent time indoors, too, some of it bone-crushing boring, some fascinating. We derived all the equations necessary to prove to the most hardened skeptic that a spacecraft could orbit the Earth. The higher, the lower the faster. Right? Right. If at 100 miles, one orbit takes an hour and a half. If we go up to 22,300 miles, one orbit takes 24 hours. So what? Well, the Earth also takes 24 hours to go around once. So that 22,300 mile satellite will stay over the same spot at the ground, i.e. be synchronous with the Earth's rotation. which is fiendishly clever if you want to use it as a communications relay satellite. Interesting applications of boring equations. Some of this was merely an extrapolation of what we already knew, pushed up into a higher, faster realm. On the other hand, some of the space rules were the very antithesis of airplane rules. Consider the rendezvous problem, with one vehicle behind another and the laggard wishing to catch up. In an airplane, the answer is quick and simple. Use increased engine thrust to increase speed and approach from the rear, then reduce relative velocity to zero to fly in formation with the target. Try this in a spacecraft and it simply will not work. Adding thrust towards the target puts one into a higher orbit, and the high orbits are slower. Remember, so instead of catching up, one falls behind. No, against all instincts, one must apply thrust away from the direction of the target. Drop down into a lower, faster orbit, and then transfer back up into the original orbit as precisely the right point in the catch-up trajectory. To complicate matters, the speeds and distance involved in the orbital situation made the pilot's eyeball useless a great deal of the time, and gimmicks such as a radar or computer have to be carried on board and operated in conjunction with a whole bevy of geniuses on the ground, who in turn are armed with their own more powerful radars and computers. Damn, we really living on Earth right now, bro. What? That's crazy. We living on Earth. When our minds became saturated with the equations and other mathematical gibberish pertaining to all this orbital mechanics, it was called the ARPS staff would have the good sense to whisk us away somewhere for a breather. Once we visited a couple of aerospace contractors' factories were not much as being built, but were advanced design groups were delighted to explain to us their far-out plans for zinging off to Mars using atomic power, or for building a huge machine that would fly through the atmosphere, scooping up and liquefying the propellants required to enable it to zoom up into space. Well, we also spent a couple of weeks with the Air Force space doctors in San Antonio, some of the same ones who had administered the NASA physical a few months before, where a large and competent staff had been assembled over the years to consider problems running the gamut, from ear blockage and diving jets to the cardiovascular effects of weightlessness. These were sharp, inquisitive, highly skilled professionals in the burgeoning field of aerospace medicine, and they welcomed us with open arms. We were invited into the inner sanctum. None of this cold doctor-patient relationship. We were behind the scenes. They kept no secrets from us, and I wondered why. First, they gave us a basic course in physiology, a very swift and deft survey of the human body and its components. Just what the hell does a spleen do anyway? Then they supplemented these classroom lectures with a look at their laboratories, where various experiments were in progress, mostly involved in anesthetized dogs. Some of these were beauties, purebred shepherds and setters that had strayed or had been abandoned or stolen. I confess I spent more time empathizing with the victims than I did learning the intricacies of a medical principles involved. Perhaps I felt like a victim to be, although I would never have the vivisectionists marching in my behalf. I began to feel a little like a volunteer dog, ready to aid his bit to the storehouse of medical knowledge waiting to be tapped by the flights into weightlessness. I began to feel like one of those data points I used to fuss over in test pilot school. There, at least, I used to produce data points. Here I was one. Could this be why the medics were all of a sudden so friendly? Did they want helpful, understanding, cooperating data points rather than suspicious, hostile ones? Or were they, as frustrated space buffs, simply welcoming comrades in the long struggle toward manned spaceflight, where medical problems were justifiable on the list along with their engineering counterparts? At any rate, speculation at this point was useless. As a group, we relaxed and enjoyed the bizarre change of a viewpoint. And parts of it really were bizarre, such as the day we were all herded downtown to visit the city morgue. An autopsy was in progress on an elderly lady who had died of peritonitis, resulting from a punctured bowel, waiting their turns on a sideboard were a couple of premature infant corpses. I'm sure a morgue is never like a florist shop, but the stench of peritonitis is especially bad, and our class was about evenly divided between those who had to leave immediately, those who stayed barely, and those who took an active interest in the proceedings. As a member of the middle third, I tried to figure out just what the bleeding hell we were doing there. Did those who left fail the course? Was this another manifestation of the medics? Trust in us? Was this supposed to make us at home with death on Earth? In case we had to cope with death in space, or we were really supposed to learn something here from the awful, obscene, jumbled pile of poor lady parts in front of us. Peritonitis is no way to go, baby. That's all I learned. That was day 84, reading every single day for 30 minutes for the rest of my life. We are at the bottom of page 39. Let's go. See y'all day 84.